Old family portraits are like little time machines. They show us what people looked like long ago, how they dressed, and even what their houses were like. Imagine looking at a picture of your great-great-grandparents. It's like stepping back in time to see their lives. These pictures aren't just pretty to look at. They're important clues for historians. Historians are like detectives who study the past. They use old letters, newspapers, and you guessed it, family portraits to understand what life was like way back when. These portraits can tell us about family relationships, social customs, and even what people thought was important. A serious-looking man in a stiff collar might show us how formal things were back then. A group of children playing in a field could tell us about childhood fun. Sometimes these old portraits hold secrets, little mysteries hidden in plain sight. A funny hat, a strange object in the background, or a missing person can all spark a historian's curiosity. And sometimes, just sometimes, a portrait reveals something truly baffling, something that makes historians scratch their heads and wonder if they've stumbled onto something impossible. Now, imagine a family portrait from 1911. A normal picture, right? A family, dressed in their best clothes, posing for the camera. But what if I told you that in the background, there's a face that looks exactly like a woman who wasn't even born yet? A woman born 15 years later. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Get ready, because this is where our mystery begins. The old photograph wasn't hanging in a fancy gallery or displayed in a museum. No, its journey back into the light started in a much dustier, more humble place. The attic of an old house in a small town called Havenwood. The house belonged to Mrs. Abigail Willowbrook, a kind, elderly woman who had lived there her entire life. After her passing, her grandson, Thomas, began the daunting task of sorting through her belongings. The attic, untouched for decades, was a treasure trove of forgotten memories. Boxes overflowed with old letters tied with ribbons, yellowed newspapers detailing long-ago events, and trinkets that whispered stories of a different time. Thomas was about to give up, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stuff, when he stumbled upon a heavy, wooden chest tucked away in a dark corner. Inside, nestled among moth-eaten quilts and delicate lace, was a stack of old photographs. Most were faded and cracked, but one stood out. It was a large portrait, carefully framed, showing a family standing proudly in front of their home. The year, 1911, was scrawled on the back in elegant cursive. Thomas, though not a historian, appreciated the glimpse into the past. He almost put it back in the chest when something caught his eye. A face, partially obscured by the shadows of the porch, seemed to stare back at him. It was a woman's face, and something about it felt wrong. He couldn't quite place it, but he knew he had to show it to someone who knew more about old photographs than he did. That's when he contacted the Havenwood Historical Society. Little did he know, he was about to unleash a mystery that would baffle experts for years to come. The family in the portrait was the Harpers. There was Samuel Harper, the father, a stern-looking man with a neatly trimmed mustache and kind eyes. He owned the local general store, a place where everyone in Havenwood gathered for supplies and gossip. Beside him stood his wife, Eleanor, a gentle woman with a warm smile and a fashionable dress that reached her ankles. They had 3 children. The eldest was a boy named William, around 12 years old, with a mischievous grin and a gap between his front teeth. Then came little Alice, 8 years old, clutching a doll tightly in her arms. And finally, there was baby George, barely a year old, held securely in Eleanor's arms. In 1911, life in Havenwood was simple but hardworking. Samuel would open the store early each morning, stocking shelves with everything from flour and sugar to nails and tools. Eleanor kept the house running smoothly, tending to the children and preparing meals. William helped his father at the store after school, while Alice entertained herself with her dolls and games. They lived in a modest but comfortable house on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and forests. Their days were filled with chores, schoolwork, and simple pleasures like picnics in the park and evenings spent reading by the fireplace. They were a close-knit family, deeply rooted in the Havenwood community. They seemed like any other family in any other small town, living a quiet, ordinary life. But this photograph, this seemingly normal snapshot of their lives, held a secret that would turn their ordinary story into something extraordinary. And it all started with that mysterious face lurking in the shadows. The face wasn't immediately obvious. It was tucked away in the shadows of the Harpers' front porch, almost hidden behind a large potted fern. If you weren't looking closely, you might miss it altogether. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It was a woman's face turned slightly to the side, as if she were peeking out from behind the plant. The shadows made it difficult to see clearly, but certain features stood out. She had dark, piercing eyes that seemed to stare right through the viewer. Her nose was long and slender, and her lips were thin and slightly pursed. Her hair, pulled back from her face, appeared to be dark and wavy. The clarity of the face was unsettling. While the rest of the background was soft and slightly blurred, the woman's face was surprisingly sharp, almost as if it had been added to the photo later. That's what made it so strange. The way the light fell on her face didn't quite match the light on the rest of the scene. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was neutral, almost melancholic. There was a sense of sadness or perhaps even longing in her eyes. It was a face that held a story, a secret that was just out of reach. And it was this face, this enigmatic figure lurking in the shadows, that would send the Havenwood Historical Society down a rabbit hole of research and speculation, leading them to a mystery that defied explanation. What was her story? And why was she in this photograph? The Havenwood Historical Society, led by the enthusiastic but usually unflappable Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, was immediately intrigued by Thomas's discovery. They carefully examined the photograph, each member taking a turn to peer at the shadowy face through a magnifying glass. It was young David, the Society's newest and most tech-savvy member, who made the connection. He had been digitizing old photographs and documents for the Society's online archive. He took the image of the mysterious woman and, on a whim, ran it through a facial recognition program he sometimes used to help identify unknown people in old class photos. The result was impossible. The program returned a single, unambiguous match, a photograph of a woman named Margaret Bell, taken in 1940. Margaret Bell was a well-known figure in Havenwood history. She was a beloved schoolteacher who had dedicated her life to educating generations of children. The problem? Margaret Bell wasn't born until 1926, 15 years after the Harper family portrait was taken. David showed the comparison to Mrs. Ainsworth. Side by side, the two faces were undeniably the same. The dark eyes, the slender nose, the pursed lips, everything matched perfectly. It was as if Margaret Bell had somehow stepped out of time and into the background of a photograph taken years before she was even born. Mrs. Ainsworth, a woman of science and reason, felt a shiver run down her spine. It defied logic. It defied everything she knew about history and photography. How could a woman born in 1926 appear in a photograph taken in 1911? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. The mystery of the face in the shadows had just deepened, transforming a curious anomaly into a full-blown historical enigma. The initial reaction at the Havenwood Historical Society was a mixture of disbelief and stunned silence. Mrs. Ainsworth, always the voice of reason, was the first to break the quiet. "It must be a mistake," she declared, adjusting her glasses. "The facial recognition software isn't always accurate. Perhaps it's a distant relative, someone who looks remarkably like Miss Bell." But David shook his head. "I checked the parameters, Mrs. Ainsworth. The confidence level is 99.9%. It's an almost perfect match." Other members chimed in, offering their own baffled opinions. Mr. Henderson, the Society's resident genealogy expert, suggested digging into the Harper and Bell family trees to see if there was a hidden connection. Maybe a secret marriage or a long-lost cousin. Miss Peabody, the Society's expert on local folklore, wondered if there was some sort of supernatural explanation. She quickly dismissed the idea as silly, but the thought lingered in the air. Could it be a ghost? A trick of the light? The most common initial theory was simply mistaken identity. Perhaps the woman in the photograph only looked like Margaret Bell. People can resemble each other, after all. But the strength of the facial recognition match made that explanation seem unlikely. The historians were genuinely perplexed. They were used to dealing with faded documents, incomplete records, and conflicting accounts. But this was something else entirely. It was a visual paradox, a historical impossibility staring them right in the face. They knew they had to investigate further, to unravel the mystery behind the face in the shadows, no matter how strange or improbable the answer might be. Their reputation as serious historians was at stake. And, secretly, they were all a little bit excited by the sheer weirdness of it all. The Havenwood Historical Society buzzed with theories, each member eager to solve the puzzle of the mysterious face. The most readily accepted theory was, of course, mistaken identity. Perhaps there was another woman in Havenwood in 1911 who bore a striking resemblance to Margaret Bell. It was a long shot, given the strength of the facial recognition match, but it was the most logical starting point. The second theory revolved around the possibility of a previously unknown relative. Mr. Henderson, poring over genealogy records, suggested that Margaret Bell might have had a great-aunt or cousin who lived in Havenwood in 1911. This relative might have been visiting the Harpers when the photograph was taken. It was a plausible explanation, but it required finding a link between the Harper and Bell families that no one had ever discovered before. A third theory focused on the photograph itself. Could it be a trick of the light, a shadow that just happened to resemble a human face? Or perhaps the photograph had been altered at some point. Maybe someone had superimposed another image onto the original, creating the illusion of a woman in the background. This theory required examining the photograph closely, analyzing its composition, and looking for any signs of tampering. These were the leading theories, the ones that the historians felt they could actually investigate. Of course, there were other, more outlandish ideas floating around. Time travel was mentioned, as were ghosts and alternate realities. But these were quickly dismissed as flights of fancy, not worthy of serious consideration. For now, the Havenwood Historical Society would stick to the facts, to the evidence, and to the hope that they could find a rational explanation for the impossible face in the shadows. With the initial theories in place, the Havenwood Historical Society turned its attention to Margaret Bell herself. They knew a lot about her public life, her long and dedicated career as a schoolteacher, her involvement in local charities, her kind and generous nature. But what about her personal life? What secrets might she have held? They started by examining her personal papers, which were housed in the Society's archives. They found letters, diaries, and photographs that painted a vivid picture of her life. She was a bright and inquisitive child, a talented student, and a devoted friend. She loved to read, to garden, and to travel. The travel was of particular interest. Did Margaret Bell ever travel outside of Havenwood? Did she ever visit the Harper's house before she was born? The records showed that she had taken several trips throughout her life, mostly to visit family in other states. But there was no evidence that she had ever been near the Harper's property before the 1920s. The historians also interviewed former students and colleagues of Margaret Bell, hoping to glean some insight into her personality and her past. Everyone spoke of her with fondness and respect. She was remembered as a kind, intelligent, and slightly eccentric woman. No one could recall anything about her that might explain her presence in the 1911 photograph. The investigation into Margaret Bell's life yielded little in the way of answers. She seemed like an ordinary woman, living an ordinary life. But the mystery of her face in the shadows remained, a persistent puzzle that refused to be solved. The Havenwood Historical Society knew they had to dig deeper, to explore every possible avenue, if they ever hoped to unravel the truth. Perhaps the answer lay not in Margaret Bell's life, but in the photograph itself. If Margaret Bell's life couldn't explain the mystery, perhaps the answer lay in the photographic techniques of the time. In 1911, photography was still a relatively new and evolving art form. Darkroom techniques were used to create a variety of effects, some intentional and some accidental. The Havenwood Historical Society consulted with a local photography expert, Mr. Abernathy, who had a passion for vintage cameras and darkroom techniques. Mr. Abernathy explained that double exposure was a common practice in 1911. This involved exposing the same photographic plate twice, creating a composite image. Could the face in the background be the result of a double exposure? He also mentioned other darkroom tricks that were used at the time, such as dodging and burning, which involved selectively lightening or darkening parts of the image to enhance certain features. Could someone have used these techniques to add a face to the photograph after it was taken? Mr. Abernathy carefully examined the photograph, looking for any signs of manipulation. He pointed out that the lighting on the face in the background was different from the lighting on the rest of the scene, which could suggest that it was added later. He also noted that the face was sharper than the surrounding area, which could be another sign of manipulation. However, he cautioned that it was difficult to be certain without examining the original photographic plate. Unfortunately, the plate was long gone, lost to time. The Havenwood Historical Society was left with only the print, which made it much harder to determine if it had been altered. The possibility of photographic manipulation remained a strong contender, but without more evidence, it was impossible to say for sure. The mystery persisted. Determined to get a definitive answer about the photograph's authenticity, the Havenwood Historical Society decided to consult with a renowned photo restoration expert, Dr. Evelyn Reed, from a prestigious university. Dr. Reed had spent her entire career studying old photographs, and she was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to uncover hidden secrets. The society carefully packaged the photograph and shipped it to Dr. Reed's lab. Weeks later, they received a detailed report. Dr. Reed had used a variety of techniques to analyze the photograph, including microscopic examination, infrared photography, and chemical analysis. Her findings were inconclusive but intriguing. She confirmed that the photograph was indeed taken around 1911, based on the type of paper and the chemicals used in the developing process. She also found no obvious signs of tampering, such as cut-and-paste techniques or digital manipulation, which, of course, wouldn't have existed in 1911. However, she did note some anomalies. The area around the face in the background showed subtle differences in texture and density compared to the rest of the photograph. She couldn't say for certain if this was due to manipulation or simply the result of natural aging and degradation. Dr. Reed's conclusion was that the photograph was likely authentic, but she couldn't rule out the possibility of subtle alterations. She suggested that the face might have been added to the photograph using advanced darkroom techniques that were difficult to detect even with modern technology. Her analysis offered no definitive answers, but it did provide some valuable clues. The Havenwood Historical Society knew they were getting closer to the truth, but the mystery of the face in the shadows remained stubbornly unsolved. They needed to explore other avenues to delve deeper into the history of Havenwood and the lives of the Harper and Bell families. The search continued, with the photographic analysis yielding only ambiguous results. Mr. Henderson, the Havenwood Historical Society's genealogy guru, embarked on a deep dive into the family histories of the Harpers and the Bells. He spent countless hours poring over census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and even old newspaper articles, searching for any connection between the two families. He traced the Harper family back several generations, finding a long line of farmers and merchants who had lived in Havenwood for centuries. He also traced the Bell family back, discovering that they had arrived in Havenwood much later, in the early 1900s. He found no direct family connection between the Harpers and the Bells. No shared ancestors, no intermarriages, no obvious links. But he did uncover some interesting details. He learned that Eleanor Harper, Samuel's wife, had a sister who had mysteriously disappeared in the late 1800s. Her name was Clara, and she had run away from home at the age of 17, never to be seen again. Could Clara be the woman in the photograph? It was a long shot, but it was worth investigating. Mr. Henderson searched for photographs of Clara, but none existed. She had disappeared before photography became widespread, leaving no visual record of her appearance. He also discovered that Margaret Bell's mother had worked as a seamstress for the Harper family in the 1920s. Could there have been a closer relationship between the two families than anyone realized? Could Margaret Bell have known about the photograph and perhaps even recognized her own face in it? The genealogy research raised more questions than it answered. It offered tantalizing hints of hidden connections and long-lost secrets, but it provided no definitive explanation for the mystery of the face in the shadows. The search continued, fueled by curiosity and a growing sense that the truth was just within reach. As the Havenwood Historical Society exhausted more conventional avenues of inquiry, Miss Peabody, the resident expert on local lore, suggested exploring the town's history and folklore. She argued that sometimes the answers to seemingly impossible mysteries could be found in the stories and legends passed down through generations. She began researching Havenwood's history, looking for any tales of time travel, ghostly apparitions, or unexplained phenomena. She interviewed longtime residents, asking them about any strange occurrences or local legends they might have heard. She discovered that Havenwood had a rich history, filled with stories of pioneer settlers, daring adventurers, and tragic love affairs. But she found no explicit legends of time travel or ghostly apparitions directly related to the Harper's house or the Bell family. However, she did uncover a curious tale about a woman in the shadows who was said to haunt the old Willowbrook estate, the same estate where Thomas found the photograph. According to the legend, the woman was a heartbroken lover who had died of grief and whose spirit continued to wander the grounds, searching for her lost love. Miss Peabody acknowledged that the legend was likely just a fanciful story, but she couldn't help but wonder if there was some connection to the face in the photograph. Could the woman in the shadows be a restless spirit, somehow captured on film? She also found a few vague references to a time slip that was said to occur near the Harper's property. According to local lore, certain areas of Havenwood were prone to temporal distortions, where the past and present could briefly overlap. Could the woman in the photograph have somehow slipped through time and been captured in the 1911 portrait? Miss Peabody knew that these stories were far-fetched, but she felt that they added another layer of intrigue to the mystery. The Havenwood Historical Society was exploring the boundaries of what was possible, blurring the lines between history and folklore, science and superstition. The search for the truth was becoming increasingly strange and unpredictable. Despite their skepticism, the Havenwood Historical Society, driven by the insatiable quest for answers, decided to consult with a local medium named Madame Esmeralda. Madame Esmeralda was known for her dramatic flair and her supposed ability to communicate with the spirit world. Most of the society members were doubtful, but they felt they had to explore every possibility. They brought the photograph to Madame Esmeralda's dimly lit parlor, filled with crystals, tarot cards, and the scent of incense. Madame Esmeralda closed her eyes, held the photograph in her hands, and began to sway gently. After a few moments, she spoke in a hushed voice. "I sense a strong presence," she said. "A woman, filled with sorrow and regret. She is trapped between two worlds." She went on to describe the woman in the photograph, accurately detailing her dark eyes, slender nose, and pursed lips. She said that the woman was not from 1911, nor was she from the time of Margaret Bell's birth. She existed outside of time, a spirit caught in a temporal loop. Madame Esmeralda claimed that the woman was connected to the Harper family, but not by blood. She said that the woman had been deeply in love with Samuel Harper, but their love was forbidden. She had died of a broken heart, and her spirit was now forever bound to the Harper's house. The medium's perspective was certainly colorful and intriguing, but most of the Historical Society members remained unconvinced. Mrs. Ainsworth politely thanked Madame Esmeralda for her insights, but privately dismissed them as fanciful imaginings. However, a seed of doubt had been planted. Could there be something more to the mystery than they were willing to believe? Or was this just another dead end in their quest for the truth? After the session with Madame Esmeralda, Mrs. Ainsworth called a meeting of the Havenwood Historical Society. She felt it was important to rein in the more outlandish theories and refocus their efforts on more realistic possibilities. "While I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm," she began, "we must remember that we are historians, not paranormal investigators. Time travel and ghosts are fascinating concepts, but they are not supported by any credible evidence in this case. She acknowledged that the mystery was perplexing, but she urged her colleagues to stick to the facts and to rely on sound historical methodology. She reiterated that the most likely explanations were still mistaken identity, a previously unknown relative, or photographic manipulation. She also addressed the legend of the woman in the shadows and the rumors of a time slip near the Harper's property. While she found these stories intriguing, she cautioned against taking them too seriously. Folklore is often based on a kernel of truth, she said, but it is also prone to exaggeration and embellishment. We must be careful not to let these stories cloud our judgment. Mrs. Ainsworth proposed that they revisit the theory of mistaken identity. Perhaps they had been too quick to dismiss it. She suggested that they compile a list of all the women who lived in Havenwood in 1911 and compare their photographs to the face in the shadows. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. The Havenwood Historical Society, now grounded back in reality, refocused their efforts on more tangible leads. They were determined to solve the mystery of the face in the shadows, but they would do so using reason, evidence, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The search for the truth continued, but it was now guided by a renewed sense of pragmatism. Just as the Havenwood Historical Society was starting to feel like they were running in circles, David, the tech-savvy member, made a surprising discovery. While compiling the list of women who lived in Havenwood in 1911, he decided to try a different approach. Instead of just comparing photographs, he decided to focus on one specific feature: the eyes. He used image editing software to isolate the eyes of the woman in the photograph, and then ran them through a database of eye patterns. It was a long shot, but he figured it was worth a try. To his astonishment, the database returned a match. Not a perfect match, but a strong one. The eyes belonged to a woman named Elsie May, who had worked as a maid for the Harper family in 1910 and 1911. Elsie May had disappeared from Havenwood shortly after the photograph was taken. No one knew where she had gone, and her name had been largely forgotten. But David's discovery suggested that she might be the woman in the shadows. He showed his findings to Mrs. Ainsworth, who was initially skeptical. Elsie May didn't look exactly like Margaret Bell, but there was a definite resemblance, particularly around the eyes and nose. Mrs. Ainsworth then remembered something. She recalled reading in Margaret Bell's personal papers that she had suffered from a childhood illness that had slightly altered the shape of her eyes. Could it be possible that Elsie May was Margaret Bell's mother? It was a shocking thought, but it offered a potential explanation for the mystery. Perhaps Margaret Bell's mother had had an affair with Samuel Harper, and Margaret Bell was actually Samuel Harper's daughter. It would explain the resemblance and the reason why Margaret Bell had never spoken about her early life. It was a breakthrough, a new perspective that shed light on the mystery and pointed them in a completely unexpected direction. The truth, it seemed, was about to be revealed. Based on the evidence gathered, the Havenwood Historical Society concluded that the most probable explanation for the face in the background was this: the woman in the shadows was Elsie May, a maid who worked for the Harpers. Elsie May and Samuel Harper had an affair, resulting in the birth of Margaret Bell. To protect the family's reputation, the affair was kept secret, and Margaret Bell was raised by another family. This explained several things. It explained the strong resemblance between Elsie May and Margaret Bell, particularly around the eyes, which David had discovered. It explained why Margaret Bell had never spoken much about her early life. It explained why she seemed to harbor a deep sadness, as Madame Esmeralda had sensed. It also explained why the facial recognition software had identified Margaret Bell in the photograph. While the software wasn't perfect, it was highly accurate, and the resemblance between Elsie May and Margaret Bell was strong enough to trigger a match. The reason Elsie May was lurking in the shadows of the photograph was likely due to her wanting to see her secret love and possibly her child. Knowing she could never openly be a part of their lives, she stayed hidden. This theory also accounted for the subtle anomalies in the photograph that Dr. Reed had discovered. The area around Elsie May's face might have been slightly altered to obscure her identity and make her appear less distinct. While this explanation was not, even with the most likely explanation, some questions about the 1911 family portrait remained unanswered. The Havenwood Historical Society had pieced together a compelling narrative, but there were still gaps in the story, loose ends that couldn't be neatly tied up. For example, what happened to Elsie May after she left Havenwood? Did she ever see Margaret Bell again? Did Samuel Harper ever acknowledge Margaret as his daughter? The records were silent on these matters. And what about Eleanor Harper, Samuel's wife? Did she know about the affair? If so, how did she feel about it? Was she complicit in keeping the secret, or was she a victim of betrayal? Her perspective was lost to time, leaving a void in the story. The biggest unanswered question was, of course, why the photograph had survived all these years. Why had it been hidden away in the attic of the Willowbrook estate? Who had taken it, and why had they kept it a secret? Was it a memento of a forbidden love, a reminder of a painful past? These questions might never be answered. The discovery of the 1911 family portrait and the subsequent investigation by the Havenwood Historical Society had a profound impact on both the Harper and Bell families, as well as the wider historical community. For the Harper family, the revelation of Samuel Harper's affair and the existence of a secret daughter was a shock. Some family members were dismayed by the news, while others were more accepting, viewing it as a long-hidden chapter in their family history. The discovery led to a renewed interest in the family's genealogy, with some members seeking to learn more about Elsie May and Margaret Bell. For the descendants of Margaret Bell, the discovery was a revelation. They had always known that their grandmother was a kind and generous woman, but they had never known the full story of her birth and her connection to the Harper family. The discovery brought them closer to their family history and gave them a new appreciation for Margaret Bell's life and legacy. The historical community was also deeply affected by the discovery. The story of the 1911 family portrait and the face in the shadows captured the imagination of historians and researchers around the world. The case became a popular topic of discussion at historical conferences and in academic journals. The Havenwood Historical Society was praised for their meticulous research and their dedication to uncovering the truth. The discovery brought renewed attention to the importance of local history and the value of preserving old photographs and documents. The portrait's legacy was one of intrigue, mystery, and a reminder that even the most ordinary-looking family portraits can hold extraordinary secrets. Even with the most probable explanation revealed, the 1911 family portrait continues to hold an enduring mystery. While the Havenwood Historical Society believes they have solved the puzzle of the face in the shadows, the unanswered questions and the lingering sense of the unknown ensure that the photograph will continue to spark curiosity and imagination for years to come. The mystery is not just about the facts, but also about the human stories behind them. It's about Elsie May, the woman in the shadows, and her secret love for Samuel Harper. It's about Margaret Bell, the secret daughter, and her quiet life as a beloved schoolteacher. It's about Eleanor Harper, the betrayed wife, and her silent suffering. These are stories that resonate with us, stories of love, loss, and betrayal. They remind us that even in the most ordinary-looking lives, there can be extraordinary secrets waiting to be uncovered. The 1911 family portrait serves as a reminder that history is not just about dates and events, but also about the lives of ordinary people and the secrets they carry with them. It is a reminder that even the story of the 1911 family portrait serves as a powerful reminder of the ability of old photographs to connect us to the past. These seemingly simple images can transport us back in time, allowing us to glimpse the lives of people who lived long ago. But old photographs are more than just pretty pictures. They are historical documents, filled with clues and secrets waiting to be uncovered. They can challenge our understanding of history, forcing us to question what we think we know about the past. The 1911 family portrait, with its mysterious face in the shadows, is a perfect example of this. It started as a simple photograph, a snapshot of a family in a small town. But it soon became a complex puzzle, a historical enigma that defied easy explanation. The investigation into the photograph led to the discovery of a hidden affair, a secret daughter, and a web of lies and deceit. It revealed the complexities of human relationships and the secrets that people keep to protect themselves and their families. In the end, the 1911 family portrait taught us that history is not always what it seems. It is a messy, complicated, and often contradictory narrative filled with unanswered questions and enduring mysteries. But it is also a story worth telling, a story that connects us to the past and helps us understand who we are today. And it all began with a face in the shadows, a face that challenged our understanding of history and sparked our imagination.